Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Web Security Academy series. In today's video, we'll be covering lab number 8 in the Broken Access Control module, titled User ID Controlled by Request Parameter with Unpredictable User IDs. If you do not have an account on the Web Security Academy, you can get one by visiting the URL portswigger.net/websecurity and clicking on the sign up button. I already have an account and I am logged in, so to access the exercise, I'm going to click on Academy. Go down, select the learning path, go down, select access control, go down one more time, and select user ID controlled by request parameter with unpredictable user IDs. All right, let's get started. This lab has a horizontal privilege escalation vulnerability on the user account page, but identifies users with GUIDs. I believe that stands for Global Unique IDs. To solve the lab, find the GUID for Carlos and submit his API key as the solution. You can log into your own account using the following credentials, and these are the credentials that we were given. All right, so the target goal over here is to find the GUID of the Carlos user and then compromise his account. Let's access the lab. All right, the page loaded. Now notice that I'm using the built-in browser in the Burp proxy, and so all my requests are already getting sent to Burp. So if we look at the page, it seems like it's some kind of blogging page, and we have a My Account functionality where we could log in with the credentials that we were given. So let's log in with that, hit login. We get the same page that we've been seeing in previous applications. So the username is right over here and the API key is right over here. Now, if I click on my account, notice over here, the ID is not something that is predictable or something that I could guess or brute force. So that's what a global user identifier is. And what that means is also that I can't figure out what the other user's GUIDs are. So in order to access another user's account, I would need to figure out what their ID is. And that would have to be leaked somewhere in the application for me to see that. So let's go to the home page and just look at some of the posts. So you could see over here, the post is written by the administrator account, and you're able to select the account that wrote the post. So if I select it over here and I look at the request that was made by the application, you could see that it actually leaks the user ID of the account that wrote the post. So this is the user ID for the administrator user. However, if you look at the target goal right over here, it is to compromise the Carlos user. So let's go back and see if there's a post that is written by the Carlos user. So let's see the second one. And here we go. The second one is written by the Carlos user. If I click on that, I should get the user ID for the Carlos user. So I'm going to copy that and then see if I could access the user's account. So let's send this to repeater. Over here, we're with the user that we were given. Now let's replace that with the GUID of the Carlos user. Hit send and look for Carlos. And here we go. We're logged in as the Carlos account and we get the API key of the Carlos user. So let's copy that and submit that as a solution. Hit OK. And we get a congratulations, you solved the lab. All right, so we successfully completed the exercise by exploiting the vulnerability manually. Now let's script it in Python. But before we do that, let's just list the steps that we would need to implement in our exploit. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is log into the account that we were given. And then the second step would be to loop through all the posts and identify which one is written by the Carlos user. Once we identify which one's written by the Carlos user, we extract the GUID and then access the Carlos user account using that GUID and extract the API key. So there's a lot to do in this script. All right, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is import the libraries that we usually import, which is the requests library, the sys library, the URL lib3 library, and then the beautiful soup library. So from BS4, import beautiful soup and the regex library. Next, we're going to disable warnings about TLS certificates. So URL lib3 dot exceptions dot insecure request warning. And then we're going to set our proxy setting. So the setting where burp is running. So we're going to send all HTTP traffic to our burp proxy that is running on HTTP 127.0.0.1 on port 8080. And same goes for HTTPS traffic. We're going to send it to where our burp proxy is running, which is localhost port 8080. All right, this looks good. Next, we're going to create our main method. So if name is equal to main, then call the main method, and we'll define the main method right over here. First thing that we're going to say is if length of the command line arguments is not equal to 2, then print the usage instructions, because clearly the user doesn't know how to run the program. So we're going to say usage, name of the program, and URL. And we'll take the name of the program from the command line argument. We'll also print example instructions just so that it's absolutely clear to the user how to run the program. So again, name of the program, and let's say an example URL is www.example.com. And again, name of the program is taken from the command line arguments. And then we'll exit the script because the user didn't run the program correctly. Okay, so if it enters this if clause, that means the user didn't run the program correctly. Assuming that the user does run the program correctly, the first thing that we're going to do is create a sessions object. And then we'll create a variable called URL, and we'll set it to the first command line argument. And then we're going to call a function called Carlos API key that takes in the session object and the URL. So this is the function that is going to exploit the broken access control vulnerability and obtain the API key of the Carlos user. And let's define it right over here. So Carlos API key takes in the session object and the URL. Now, the first thing that we need to do is log in as the account that we were given. So if we go back to proxy and look at that request, it was a post request. It was to this path right over here. Let's copy that. And it took in 3 parameters, the CSRF token, the username, and the password. Now we know the username and we know the password. However, we don't know the CSRF token. So we'll need to extract this from the login page, because if you look at the GET request to the login page and use a search for CSRF, you could see over here, this is where we need to extract it from. So what we need to do is add a comment, get CSRF token from login page. And to do that, we're going to create a variable called login URL and set it to the URL plus the path to the login page, which we just copied. And then we're going to create a new variable called CSRF token. And we're going to set it to the return value of the function get CSRF token, which takes in the session object and the login URL. Once we obtain the CSRF token, we'll implement the rest of our code over here. All right, so let's implement this function right over here. So let's copy it and implement it. So S URL. To obtain the CSRF token, we'll do the same thing that we did with previous exercises. So we're going to perform a GET request to the login page, set verify to be equal to false, because we don't want to verify TLS certificates. Set proxies to be equal to proxies, because we want the request to pass through burp. And then we're going to use beautiful soup to parse the response, which is r.text, and extract the CSRF token. So we'll save it in a variable called CSRF, and we'll find it using the find function in beautiful soup. So if we go back over here and we look for CSRF, notice that it's in an input element that has the name CSRF, and the string that we're looking for, which is this over here, is in the value attribute. So to find it, we're going to say, look for the input element, and then search for the input element that has name to be equal to CSRF, and the string that we're specifically looking for is in the value attribute. So this will extract the CSRF token, and we'll return it right over here, so that once it's returned, it gets saved in the CSRF token variable. All right, now that we've got our CSRF token, the next step is to log in as the account that we were given. So I'm going to print logging in as the account that we were given. And to do that, if we go back to burp, and this is the nice thing about writing a script, you actually understand exactly how the application works. So you could see the way to log in is through a post method on the /login path. And then it takes in the three variables again, CSRF token, username, and password. Now we have all three variables, so we should be able to log in. First thing we're going to do is save the parameters in a variable called data login. So we're going to say username is equal to the username that we were given. Password is again equal to the password that we were given. And then the CSRF variable is equal to CSRF token, which we just extracted. Now let's perform the request. So we're going to say r is equal to s.post login URL. Data is equal to data login, the variable we just created. Verify is equal to false, and proxies is equal to proxies. And then we're going to set the response of the request to a variable called res. Now we need to verify that we actually logged in as the account. And so we're going to say if logout is in the response, then print successfully logged in as the account that we were given. Otherwise, print could not log in as the account, and exit the program, because if we can't even log in, that means we can't exploit the vulnerability. Okay, now that we've logged into the account, the next step is to look through all the posts. So if we go to home over here, this likely timed out. So let's reopen it, and while that loads, if we look at the list of our steps, we need to loop through all the posts and identify which one was created by the Carlos user. So we'll implement that right over here. So we'll create a comment saying obtain Carlos's GUID, and the way we're going to do that is call a function called Carlos GUID. That takes in the session object and the URL and save the return value in a parameter called GUID. And I'll say rest of code here. So we need to implement this function. What this function is going to do is it'll load this page right over here. So the main page, it'll look for all the post IDs. So if we go back to the main page over here, and we look for all instances of post ID. So you could see over here, there's 20 matches. What it'll do is it'll loop through that response and save the number under the post ID. And then it'll check each post ID. It'll perform this request over here for each post ID and see if it could find out if the Carlos user wrote that post or not. And if the Carlos user did write that post, it'll extract the GUID. Now that's a lot of code, and that's why I decided to implement it in its own function instead of write it in this function over here. So let's write it over here. Let's say def Carlos GUID. Again, the first thing that we need to do is load the home page. That's a simple get request. So let's say request.get URL, verify, set it to false, and proxies to be equal to proxies. I don't need to use my session object anymore, but I believe even if you use it, you should be okay. And then I'm going to set the response to a variable called res. And I'm going to say post IDs is equal to re.find all. And I'm going to use a regex string. So if we go back over here, you could see all the post IDs. They're in this form right over here. So I'm going to copy this entire thing, put it in here, and make it a regex string. So I don't need this part. I just need any string that has post ID in it. And then I'm going to look for any number of characters. So word characters. And then I'm going to stop when I find a double quote right over here. So what this tells the program to do is essentially look through the response and identify any characters that are between this string over here and this string over here and save them in an array. Now, if we print post IDs, you'll see that we have duplicates. So let's save this over here and run the program. With this type of program, you want to make sure that it's actually correct before you continue with the rest of the code. So let's say 8.py and copy this, paste it in here, hit enter, and I wrote the name of the program incorrectly. All right, so I do get an error saying the CSRF token is not there. I wonder if this timed out. It did not, so line number 14. So that's really weird. If we go to burp, let's see what request it's trying to perform. Okay. So it looks like it's doing it correctly. Let's just rerun it again. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Oh, and I see what the error is. Okay, so this should be right over here. Okay, let's clear it, run it one more time. Okay, so you could see over here when we're printing the post IDs, it has duplicates in the post IDs, and the reason that is because if we're looking for this string right over here, and we put it in here, you could see that it's not just for the post, but you also encounter that string when it comes to other items as well. And so what we need to do is make them unique. So we'll say unique post IDs. And a really simple way of doing that is converting this to a set, because a set can only have unique values, and then converting it back to a list. So if we print unique post IDs right now, we should only see unique values. All right, so these are the posts that we have. We have post number 7, post number 5, post number 9, post number 4, and so on. What we're going to do in this script is loop through all the posts to identify which one is written by Carlos. We'll do that next. So loop through post IDs and identify which one is written by Carlos. To do that, we'll say for I in unique post IDs, perform the following requests. So R is equal to s.get. It's a get request, and it takes in the URL plus the path to the post. So when we were viewing a specific post, this was the path right over here. And notice again, it's a get method. So let's copy this, put it in here, remove the 7, and add the post ID as I, because we're looping through a list. Set verify to be equal to false, and proxies to be equal to proxies, and then set the response to a variable called res. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for Carlos in the response. If I find that Carlos is in the response, then I print found the Carlos GUID, because that's the post that Carlos wrote. So I'm going to say GUID is equal to re.findAll. And I'm going to search through a regex string for it. So if I look up href, it should be in one of the hrefs. Okay, so you could see over here under blog author, it's an href element, and this is the string that I'm looking for. So let's copy that, put it in here. So I want to say, look for this string right over here, which is any number of characters, and it'll be a substring of this entire string right over here. So what the program is going to do is it'll essentially output all the characters that are between the string user ID is equal to and the string that is equal to a single quote character. And it needs to look through the response. And then I'm just going to say output the first element. Since we are using find all, it will output an array, and the GUID will be in the first element of the array. All right, and then we're going to say return GUID. And what that'll do is when we call this function, it'll return it right over here and save it in the variable GUID. Okay, so now that we have the GUID of the Carlos user, all we have to do is essentially log in as the Carlos user and then extract the API key. So let's remove this over here and continue our code. So over here, we're obtaining Carlos's API key. So we'll say Carlos account URL is equal to URL plus the path for Carlos's account. So if we go back to repeater, it's this right over here plus the GUID. So let's copy that and add the GUID that we just extracted. And then we're going to access the account. So s.get Carlos account URL, set verify to be equal to false, and proxies to be equal to proxies. We're going to save the response in a variable called res. And again, we're going to search for Carlos in res. If it is there, that means we successfully accessed Carlos's account. So we'll print successfully accessed Carlos's account. However, if it's not there, let's make this a little bit smaller. We're going to print could not access Carlos's account and exit the program. All right, let's assume that we successfully accessed Carlos's account. So we were able to get this response over here. The next step is to extract this API key. So to do that, we're going to print retrieving API key, and I'm going to save it in a variable called API key. And again, we're going to use regex to retrieve it. So find all, everything that is in this regex string, and the first element in the outputted list. So the string that I'm looking for is this right over here. So let's copy this, put it in here. We're going to say that this over here is what we're looking for, so any number of characters. So dot star, and look for the string between this string over here and this string over here. Now we do need to escape these characters so that it works properly, and this one as well. So what the program is going to do is similar to the previous one. It'll look for the characters that are between this string over here and end with this string over here, and it'll output them. And then we're going to print API key as, and add the API key. And let's say res, and we could actually just do that right over here. So 0. All right, this looks good. This should be the end of our program. So let's make this a little bit smaller so that we could review it. So the first thing is we call the main method. In the main method, it creates a new session object and saves the URL from the command line argument. And then it calls the function Carlos API key. In Carlos API key, it first obtains the CSRF token using the get CSRF token function. And then it logs in as the account that we were given. It confirms that we logged into the account, and then it obtains Carlos's GUID using the function Carlos GUID, which we also wrote right over here. In that function, what it does, it essentially loops through all the post IDs to identify which one is written by Carlos. And then once it identifies which one is written by Carlos, it extracts that GUID and saves it right over here. From there, we access Carlos's account, and then we extract the API key and output it on the screen. Hopefully there's no errors, so let's save it. Clear this, and this might have timed out, and it didn't, so let's run it. And we definitely have an error, and I know what it is already, so line number 57. So if Carlos is in res. So far, so good. Oh, we don't need that print statement anymore. So let's search for print, just so that our code looks clean. Here we go. So let's remove this, save it, and rerun this. And here we go. It performs all the steps that we need to perform, and it outputs the API key. So let's submit that, hit enter, and it says, congratulations, you solved the lab. All right, so we successfully completed the exercise by exploiting the vulnerability manually and then scripting it in Python. In the next couple of labs, we'll look at more complex cases of broken access control vulnerabilities.